and welcome to Straight Talk with Sayes and Salim. This is the first of many videos breaking down the issues that affect Guyana's development. My partner on Straight Talk tonight and just about every other night is Sayes Singh, known as Sayes. He's a member of the Guyana diaspora, a chartered accountant, financial strategist, and also a columnist on financial issues. He served as a candidate in the 2011 Guyanese general elections and is passionate about politics, but now considers himself a retired politician. We'll see about that. He has written columns and have been published by major Guyanese newspapers. He's known as a compelling speaker and a thinker on the Guyanese economy. Today, Sayes and I will be discussing why Guyana is more indebted than Haiti. That's a travesty in itself. Sayes, please describe Guyana's debt landscape and how bad it is at the moment.
Well, good night, Salim, and good night, Internet world. The common measure of debt is basically a ratio called debt to GDP, which is the total debt to the size of the economy. And what we can see is that the debt to the GDP ratio has been rapidly deteriorating when it comes to Guyana since 2016. Sadly, there's a reason for this, is because Guyana is borrowing more than the economy is growing. So because the economy is growing at about an average of 2.1% over 2017, but the debt grew by 6.3%, it is putting undue pressure on the economy.
Gloomy kind of landscape you've given there for the Guyana economy. What do you believe are the driving forces behind the sudden increase of debt over the past few years?
Well, I mean, clearly government spending is rapidly increased. Any government with a high debt to GDP ratio must review how they're spending. And the IMF did an Article 4 consultation on Guyana for 2017, and that's exactly what they brought out. They're saying that we have to review the way we spend, and one, we must spend more efficiently, and two, we have to spend on projects that will generate new economic opportunities for the country.
Great. And you mentioned that that the debt is growing faster than the economy in one of your articles. Mm-hmm. What does this mean for the economy moving forward? And I'd really like for you to elaborate on this. You've got your spending that's growing faster than your growth in terms of the economy. It must mean something really bad in the future for Guyana. So if you can elaborate on that, I'll really appreciate it.
Well, I'll back it up with some statistics, and then I'll tell you what the consequences of these deteriorating statistics. For example, the IMF in their report, not my figures, this is certified numbers by the IMF. The IMF certified the debt to GDP ratio in 2017 at 52.2%. And they projected it to rise to 57.1% by the end of 2018. I've looked at the Bank of Guyana first quarter numbers, and it's already at 54%. 54% of the economy, the size of the economy, is now debt. That's the size of the debt. And hence the IMF is not wrong on their projection because the actual empirical evidence is proving them correct. The consequences of such a rapid escalation in the debt to GDP ratio can mean many things. One, you can be crowding out the private sector because you got to tax the economy more, you got to tax business more, you got to tax workers more to get more revenue to pay, to service the debt, as they call it. Guyana is now faces with increased debt service costs. For example, in 2017, the domestic debt service payment increased by 11.7%. That's to pay the domestic debt. And then to pay the external debt, which is the foreign debt, that increased by 13.2% in 2017. So clearly that is explaining that The budget will have to increase. They'll have to tax people more to get more money to pay all these debts. I mean, it's as simple as that. The other big challenge is in their desperation to borrow to continue to prop up an economy that is not having adequate investment, new foreign direct investment, and so forth. They're going and borrow money from organizations that are not being traditionally having what you call, when you go to a bank, you go on a matter of trust. So if you go to organizations and borrow that doesn't have a track record of trust, you could be borrowing money at higher interest rate from people who do not have the kind of credibility and stability. You see, when you borrow money from, like, let's say the IDB, there's a term and there's a contract and there's fixed payment schedules. You don't know if this is going to be the same with some of the non-traditional borrowers. And they can call in these debts early and put severe pressure on the economy. Now,
what are some examples of these non-traditional lenders?
Well, I really shirk to do it, but I mean, case in point, China. I mean, Guyana is borrowing more and more from China, and who has lots of free cash, but there is not a track record whereby they will stand with Guyana consistently into the future. I mean, we don't know how they will react if their economy change. Will they call in all of these debts, and what will happen to Guyana? But also, Guyana is actually enslaving itself, because when China lends you all these monies, they're basically using it as an opportunity to buy your political vote at places like the United Nations. The other thing that this increasing debt is doing, it stifles economic growth. In addition to that, when you continue to borrow, you have to expand the budget to fund these debt. So you basically are on a track to put a lot of pressure on the private sector to generate more taxation. And if they can't, then you're forced to increase the taxation. It could also cause inflation in some cases. So debt is not a good thing. I mean, some level of debt is always good, but debt is not a good thing in general. So when you borrow, your whole concept of borrowing is to borrow and invest in assets that will generate further assets, new wealth, create jobs. And that is what it's not happening enough in Guyana.
And it seems to be a pretty vicious cycle. If we take the example of a home, if someone in Guyana right now makes about $100,000 a month, which is probably below the median income in Guyana, in 2 years, 57% or 57,000 will go towards expenses. Or sorry, it goes towards paying debts. Like let's say a mortgage, or let's say you borrow money to educate your child or something. And you have 43,000 that is left to do everything else, do grocery. That's for entire month, to do grocery,
exactly.
To educate your kids and everything else. So it is certainly not a position that a family wants to be in. It's certainly not a position that a country needs to be in. And I know for sure families take remedial measures to fix this in their home, if that's the case. What are some of the how can we reverse this trend? I know you've done tremendous amount of analysis on the issue. You've been studying Guyana for quite a while. What do you believe could be some of those reversal trends?
The easiest way to solve this, and Desmond Hoyt, previous president of Guyana, was able to solve it. So it's not like there's not enough empirical evidence to prove that Guyana cannot solve this problem. When Desmond Hoyt took over power, Guyana was technically insolvent. The world had considered Guyana as uncreditworthy. Nobody wanted to do business with Guyana in 1985, 86, 87. 1988, what Desmond Hoyt did in 1988 is a very simple solution. And that's why I do not understand why the politicians are not doing it more actively. He went to all the major capitals of the world, and he basically says, hey, Guyana is in a bad shape, but we're open for business. We are going to break down any barriers to get you in here to do business in Guyana. Mm-hmm. So what are the inhibitors to doing business for you in Guyana? We are going to sort it out at very short notice. Now, you got to understand, international investors got many countries who are competing for this capital. So you got to have a differentiator to show that you're better than Singapore, or you're better than or Jamaica. I mean, Jamaica is one of the hot spots for new investments in the Caribbean, and you got to show that you have a differentiator. The other thing is you have to be able to sell your country as a source of produce, value-added produce that the world wants. You don't produce things because you want to produce it. You produce what the market wants. So, for example, I've seen that they've baked hoorah that we've gotten new rice contract with Mexico. But if it's paddy being exported to Mexico, then you're wasting time. It's better you just close the production down and go to sleep. What you should have been doing is going to the big cereal manufacturers, if not in America, anywhere in the world, and say to them, hey, we're a top quality producer of rice. We're going to give you a tax holiday, come and build a cereal manufacturer, a rice cereal, which is a great product, with all the other kinds of value-added produce. Come and do it in Guyana. We are going to create the land for you. We're going to create the industrial site for you. We're going to give you even the shell building. We want you to bring the machinery and the technology and the know-how, and we want you to hire our people, train our people, and hire our people to do it. Those are the kind of things that Hoyt did when he was the president. And many people, Singapore has done this very successfully. Privatization is another route that they can do, is that, again, we have gold and diamond in this country. I've never heard that Guyana said, we are going to go and develop a jewelry manufacturing industry where our raw gold can then be converted to value-added jewelry. I mean, think about India. I would have gone straight to India and says, we know you guys love jewelry. Billions of dollars of jewelry you're buying every year. Mm-hmm. Send us your technicians. We're going to give you the housing. We're going to give you the land. We're going to give you everything. Just bring your technicians, bring your ideas, bring your skills, train our people, and let's start producing some jewelry and start exporting it to India. We're exporting raw gold to Canada and other countries at pennies on the pound, as compared to if we were exporting jewelry. So the first main thing that we have to do is we have to encourage investment to encourage growth. And the only way, the easiest way of doing this is through the private sector. So while the government or the state serves well as a facilitator of the private sector, breaking down barriers, it has to be a partnership between the private sector and the government, where the government is breaking down barriers, but also pushing the private sector to do the investment. And that will drive the kind of growth. Yeah. We need to have tax reform, obviously, but more importantly, we have to cut government spending. I've just read an article where in an economy where debt is expanding, this government of Guyana in 2018 has made it the decision to expand the army by 1,500 people at a cost of $2 billion addition a year. That's $2 billion that could have gone into industrial estates, into investment towards bringing people to this country to understand what we produce.
That could be employment for those 1,500 folks.
Of course. We don't need 1,500 more in the army. It's a ridiculous idea. But of course, it means the priorities of the current government is a bit confusing. And those, you see, when you expand the army by 1,500, it doesn't pay for itself. It means you have to tax the private sector to pay for these 1,500 armies. But if the private sector is being crowded out and stifled, then there's not going to be any growth in the taxation, or the taxation is not going to grow at the kind of level that you want it to grow.
Yeah. So I mean, that's another example, prime example of an expense-driven administration as against a revenue-driven administration. I know you have your ears and your eyes very close to Guyana. You've been doing a lot of writing and some great work, of course. Do you think the current administration, and I think you've touched it a little bit, they understand the severity of the problem and where it's going to lead Guyana? And do you believe they're looking at steps, that can meaningfully change that direction?
Well, let's look at the severity of the problem. I mean, you have what you call some benchmarks that you really don't want to cross. And one of the benchmarks that Guyana has always measured itself by is you don't really want to cross the $2 billion mark, $2 billion US mark on the stock of debt. But that's going to happen in 2018. For the first time since 2014, Guyana is going to surpass $2 billion in stock of debt, 2.12 billion to be exact. Right now, at the end of 2017, it was 1.86. It's already at about 1.93 billion already. So we are clearly going in a direction that clearly exposes that the government doesn't understand what they're doing. They have a political ambition, but it doesn't reconcile to sensible economic ambitions. Meaning, what does a country or a government do? First thing you do, you try to grow your economy, you create jobs for your people, you make sure that the social nets are working. So if you're spending more of your monies on debt, then you have less money for the hospitals, the schools, and a clear example of this has come out by the teachers.
Yeah.
The previous government, of course, everybody was complaining that the teachers were getting 5% every year at Christmas under the previous government, retroactive for the whole year. But since then, since the new government come into play, that situation has changed. And it says, okay, we want to go to collective bargaining. It's been 2 years now they've been in the collective bargaining. The teachers have been without pay. But the undercurrents of all of this is that they're starving the teachers because they have to fulfill all these other ambitions. You spend $1.5 billion on a parade ground. You spend $2 billion on expanding the army by 1,500 people. And you keep spending monies on things that don't generate new monies, and that's the challenge. I mean, if you spend money on teachers, you actually will be generating something for the nation, because the strongest wealth of any nation is its brain power, its people. And if we can't invest in the teachers, they themselves will not be motivated enough to invest in the students. So we're cutting the future of this country short. So I don't believe that, to answer your question, I don't believe that this government understands what they're doing.
And with that, I want to thank you, Cesar. This has been a great discussion, pretty revealing, and it demonstrates to a large extent what Guyana is going through. And if this was a family environment and no income was coming in, you can imagine what will happen with the people and the structures they live in. Again, thank you for your great work. You're doing some fantastic work. Keep it up. And for our viewers out there, if you found that this video had great content, please share with your family and friends. And until we meet again, thank you for watching. And Cez, before you go, I just want to ask you, what is your email so that someone might want to
most certainly. For feedback, you can send your emails to sasin1@yahoo.com. That is SASESIN1@yahoo.com.
Great. Well, thank you again, and look forward to bringing you another discussion on issues that affect Guyana's development.